In the heart of TechCorp's sleek corporate headquarters, Alex Martinez, a mid-level executive, was about to experience the career-changing moment they had worked tirelessly for. What started as a normal workday filled with excitement over landing a $2.1 billion contract with Hartford Analytics quickly spiraled into a shocking confrontation when Alex learned their salary would be slashed by 70%. Alex Martinez wasn't your typical corporate employee. For 4 years, they had built a reputation as the go-to person for closing the toughest deals, known for dedication, competence, and a knack for sealing partnerships that others thought were impossible. When Alex received the news of their success with Hartford Analytics, they had no idea it would lead them straight into the jaws of betrayal. The joy of landing the company's biggest contract was overshadowed when Alex discovered their compensation was being drastically reduced. Their response was one of quiet shock, followed by a growing determination to understand the why behind the decision. A determination that would lead them to uncover a system of manipulation, exploitation, and corporate greed. What began as a celebration of success would become a battle for recognition and justice. The corporate world Alex thought they knew would never be the same after they confronted the system that sought to erase their value. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The email notification pinged at exactly 3:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. I'd been refreshing my inbox every 30 seconds for the last hour, waiting for word from Hartford Analytics. The $1 billion international contract we'd been chasing for 8 months was finally coming to a close, and I, Alex Martinez, mid-level executive with a track record of closing deals that others couldn't, was about to find out if all those late nights and weekend calls had paid off. The subject line read, Hartford Analytics, Final Decision. My hands were shaking as I clicked it open. Dear Alex, we are pleased to inform you that after extensive deliberation, Hartford Analytics has decided to move forward with your proposal. We look forward to a successful partnership and will be in touch regarding next steps. Congratulations on a job well done. I stared at the screen for a full minute, letting the words sink in. We did it. I did it. $1 billion. The biggest contract in our company's history, and it had my name on it. Not Mark Donovan's, our CEO, not Sam Wright's, the senior executive who'd been circling this deal like a vulture for months. Mine. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run through the office shouting the news. Instead, I took a deep breath, closed my laptop, and walked to the break room to get some water. My reflection in the microwave door showed someone who looked composed, professional, like landing a deal worth more than most small countries' GDP was just another Tuesday. But inside, I was electric. Within 20 minutes, word had spread through the office like wildfire. Jordan Lee, our senior project manager, was the first to find me. Alex, Jordan said, sliding into the chair across from my desk. Is it true Hartford said yes? I nodded, trying to keep the grin off my face. Signed, sealed, and about to be delivered. Jordan's eyes widened. $1 billion. Jesus, Alex, do you realize what this means for the company, for you? Before I could answer, Nina Patel from Analytics appeared at my cubicle wall. Oh my God, Alex, everyone's talking about it. This is incredible. Then came Zoe Davis from Project Coordination, practically bouncing on her feet. Alex, this is amazing. I mean, this changes everything, right? The congratulations kept coming throughout the afternoon. Colleagues I barely spoke to were stopping by my desk, offering handshakes, high fives, even a few awkward side hugs from people who'd never acknowledged my existence before. Sarah from HR mentioned something about this being career-defining. Ben from Mark's office said the whole executive team was buzzing about it. But the one person who didn't stop by, didn't call, didn't even send an email, was Mark himself. At 6 p.m., when most of the office had cleared out, I was still at my desk finishing up the preliminary paperwork for the Hartford transition, trying to ignore the growing knot in my stomach. Mark's office light was still on. I could see it from where I sat. His door was closed as usual, but I kept expecting him to emerge with that calculated smile of his, ready to claim credit, or at least acknowledge what had just happened. He didn't at 7 p.m. I packed up my things and headed for the elevator as I waited for it to arrive. I heard Mark's door open, his voice carried across the nearly empty office. "Sam, can you stay late tonight? We need to discuss the Hartford situation." The Hartford situation. Not the Hartford success. Not the Hartford breakthrough. The situation. Like it was a problem to be managed rather than a victory to be celebrated. The elevator doors opened, and as I stepped inside, I caught a glimpse of Sam Wright walking toward Mark's office. Her expression was unreadable, but there was something in the way she moved, purposeful, determined, that made my stomach clench. The doors closed and I rode down to the parking garage in silence. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the day over and over, the congratulations from my colleagues, the silence from Mark, the way Sam had looked when she'd headed into his office for their late-night meeting about the Hartford situation. I'd been with the company for 4 years. 4 years of being the reliable one, the one who took on the projects no one else wanted, who worked weekends, who never complained when deadlines got moved up or budgets got slashed. I'd built my reputation on being dependable, competent, invisible when necessary, and visible when it mattered. Today should have mattered. Today should have been the day Mark finally saw me as more than just another mid-level executive who could be counted on to get things done. Today should have been recognition, promotion, maybe even a partnership track conversation. Instead, I got silence the next morning. I arrived at the office early, hoping to catch Mark before his day got busy. His assistant Ben was already at his desk, looking harried as usual. "Morning, Ben," I said, trying to sound casual. "Is Mark available for a quick chat?" Ben didn't look up from his computer. "He's in back-to-back meetings until lunch, Alex, but I'll let him know you stopped by." "It's about the Hartford contract," I said. "Right," Ben said, still not looking at me. "I'll make sure he knows." By 10 a.m., the congratulations had started again. Colleagues who hadn't heard the news yesterday were stopping by my desk. The energy was infectious, and despite Mark's continued silence, I found myself getting caught up in the excitement. That's when the company-wide email arrived, subject line, "Hartford Analytics Partnership Announcement." "Team, I'm pleased to announce that we have successfully secured a landmark partnership with Hartford Analytics. This $2.1 billion contract represents the largest deal in our company's history and is a testament to our collective commitment to excellence. This achievement reflects the hard work and dedication of our entire organization as we move forward with this exciting opportunity. I want to thank everyone who contributed to making this possible. Together, we have positioned ourselves for unprecedented growth and success. Best regards, Mark Donovan, CEO." I read it 3 times. Our collective commitment, our entire organization, everyone who contributed, not a single mention of my name, not even a hint that one person had been primarily responsible for landing the deal. It was all about the team, the organization, the collective effort. Jordan appeared at my desk within minutes holding a printed copy of the email. "Alex," Jordan said, voice low, "are you seeing this?" I nodded, unable to speak. "This is bullshit," Jordan continued. "You landed this deal. You spent 8 months building the relationship. With Hartford, you were the one taking calls at midnight. You were the one who figured out their needs when everyone else was throwing generic proposals at them." "It's fine," I said, but my voice came out strained. "It's about the company, not individuals." Jordan stared at me. "Alex, you know that's not how it works. When Tom landed the Meridian contract last year, Mark sent out an email specifically praising his leadership when Sam closed the Axis deal. She got a company-wide recognition and a bonus announcement." I did know that I remembered both emails clearly because I'd wondered what it would feel like to have my name in one of them. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of congratulations that felt increasingly hollow. Colleagues kept mentioning Mark's email, kept saying how great it was that the company was doing so well. But the excitement in their voices seemed forced, like they were reading from a script at lunch. I sat alone in the cafeteria, picking at a sandwich I couldn't taste, thinking about the email, thinking about Mark's silence, thinking about the meeting he'd had with Sam the night before. That's when it hit me. This wasn't an oversight. This wasn't Mark being too busy to acknowledge individual contributions. This was intentional. Mark didn't want anyone to know that Alex Martinez, mid-level executive, had single-handedly landed the biggest contract in company history. Because if people knew that if Hartford knew that, then Alex Martinez might start to seem a little too valuable, a little too independent, a little too much. Like someone who deserved more than a mid-level position and a mid-level salary. The sandwich turned to cardboard in my mouth. I spent the afternoon going through the motions, responding to emails, updating project timelines, preparing for tomorrow's meetings. But my mind was elsewhere, replaying every interaction I'd had with Mark over the past 4 years, looking for signs I'd missed, clues that might explain why my biggest professional victory felt like the beginning of something terrible. At 5 p.m., most of the office started clearing out. I stayed at my desk ostensibly to catch up on work, but really because I wasn't ready to go home, wasn't ready to sit alone with my thoughts and the growing certainty that something was very wrong. At 5:30, Mark's office door opened. He walked out looking as polished and composed as always, his silver hair perfectly styled, his navy suit crisp and expensive. He moved through the office like he owned it, which of course he did. Stopping to chat with a few stragglers, asking about their projects, their families, their weekend plans. He walked right past my desk without a glance. I sat there watching him head for the elevator, watching the doors close behind him, and felt something cold settle in my chest. This was supposed to be my moment, my recognition, my proof that 4 years of dedication and hard work had been worth something. Instead, I was sitting alone in an emptying office, wondering why the biggest success of my career felt like the beginning of my downfall. But I didn't know yet that I didn't know that Mark's silence wasn't just indifference, it was strategy. I didn't know that while I was celebrating landing the Hartford contract, Mark and Sam were already planning how to make sure I never got credit for it. I didn't know that the email I'd receive tomorrow morning would change everything. All I knew was that something was wrong and that the congratulations from my colleagues felt more like condolences. The office was quiet now, just the hum of computers and the distant sound of the cleaning crew starting their rounds. I gathered my things and headed for the elevator, thinking about Hartford Analytics, thinking about $2. 1 billion, thinking about how success was supposed to feel different than this. As the elevator doors closed, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the polished metal. Tired, confused, but still hopeful that maybe tomorrow Mark would finally say something, would finally acknowledge what I'd accomplished. I had no idea that tomorrow would be the day everything fell apart. The email came at 8:07 a.m. Subject line, compensation adjustment notice. I blinked at the header, still half asleep, balancing a mug of coffee in one hand while scrolling through my inbox. I almost deleted it, thinking it was some kind of spam or phishing attempt, but the sender was legitimate HRI TechCorp, our actual human resources department. I clicked it open. Dear Alex Martinez, effective immediately, your compensation package will be adjusted as part of our ongoing company restructuring initiative. Your new annual salary will be $45,000, representing a reduction from your current $150,000 base salary. This adjustment reflects our commitment to operational efficiency and sustainable growth. Please direct any questions to Human Resources. Best regards, TechCorp Human Resources Department. The coffee mug slipped from my hand. It hit the kitchen floor with a crash, ceramic shards scattering across the tile. Hot coffee splashing against the cabinets and my bare legs, but I barely noticed because I was staring at the numbers on my phone screen, reading them over and over, trying to make them make sense. $45,000 down from $150,000, a 70% pay cut effective. Immediately, I stood there in my kitchen at 8:07 a.m. on a Wednesday morning, surrounded by broken ceramic and spilled coffee, trying to process what I was reading. The Hartford contract had been signed. Less than 48 hours ago, the biggest deal in company history was mine, and now they were cutting my salary by more than 2/3. This had to be a mistake. I grabbed my laptop from the dining table and opened my email. The message was still there. Word for word, exactly as I'd read it on my phone, I checked the sender again. HR TechCorp. Com legitimate. I checked the date, Wednesday, November 15th, 2024. Today, I checked my employee ID number in the recipient field. Correct? It wasn't a mistake. It was real. I tried calling the HR direct line but got voicemail. You've reached TechCorp Human Resources. Our normal business hours are 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. Monday through Friday, please leave a detailed message and we'll return your call within 24 hours. 24 hours. I couldn't wait 24 hours for an explanation of why my salary had just been obliterated. I threw on clothes, grabbed my keys, and drove to the office. Running 3 red lights and taking corners too fast, my hands were shaking on the steering wheel and my vision kept blurring from what I told myself was anger, but felt more like panic. The office was nearly empty when I arrived at 8:45 a.m., just a few early arrivals, and the security guard who nodded at me like it was any other day, like my entire financial life hadn't just been demolished by a 4-sentence email. The HR department was on the 3rd floor. I took the stairs 2 at a time and found the door locked. A small placard next to the handle read, HR department hours 9 a.m., 5 p.m. I waited at exactly 9 a.m. Patricia Chen, the HR director, arrived, looking surprised to see me standing outside her department. Alex, she said, fumbling with her keys. You're here early. Patricia, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I need to talk to you about the email I received this morning. Her expression shifted from surprise to something that looked almost like pity. Of course, come in. Her office was small and sterile with motivational posters about teamwork and a desk covered in neat stacks of paperwork. She gestured for me to sit in one of 2 chairs facing her desk while she settled behind it. The compensation adjustment, she said before I could speak. Yes, the compensation adjustment, I repeated, trying not to let the sarcasm bleed through. Patricia, what is this? There has to be some mistake. She opened a folder on her desk and pulled out a document that looked official and final. Alex, I understand this comes as a shock, but the adjustment is part of a company-wide restructuring initiative. We're implementing cost-saving measures across all departments. All departments, I said. Patricia, I just landed the Hartford contract 2 days ago, $1 billion, and you're cutting my salary by 70%. She didn't meet my eyes. The restructuring decisions were made based on multiple factors. Alex, it's not personal, it's business. Multiple factors. I felt my voice rising. What factors? Patricia, what possible business logic justifies cutting the salary of the person who just brought in the biggest contract in company history? Alex, I understand you're upset, but these decisions come from the executive level. I'm just implementing the directives I've been given. Then let me talk to someone at the executive level. Let me talk to Mark. Patricia's expression became even more uncomfortable. Mark is aware of the restructuring. Alex, the directive came from his office. The words hit me like a physical blow. Mark knew. Mark had approved. This maybe even initiated it. The silence after the Hartford announcement, the meeting with Sam, the complete lack of acknowledgement. Suddenly, it all made sense. This wasn't about cost cutting. This wasn't about operational efficiency. This was personal. Patricia, I said, struggling to keep my voice under control. I need to see the documentation for this restructuring. I need to understand the criteria that were used to determine these salary adjustments. Alex, I can't share personnel information about other employees, but I can tell you that the restructuring affects multiple positions across various departments. I'm not asking about other employees. I'm asking about me. I'm asking why the person who just secured a $1 billion contract is being treated like a liability instead of an asset. Patricia shifted in her chair, looking increasingly uncomfortable. Alex, These are complex business decisions that involve factors beyond any single project or contract. Factors like what? I really can't discuss the specifics of executive decision-making, Alex. What I can tell you is that your position remains secure, and your benefits package will continue unchanged. My position remains secure, I said slowly. Patricia, you just cut my salary by 105. Source, and you're telling me my position is secure. The restructuring is about right-sizing compensation to reflect current market conditions and operational needs. Right-sizing. The corporate speak was making me nauseous. Patricia, yesterday I was worth $150. You zero today I'm worth $45,000. What changed overnight? She was quiet for a long moment, shuffling papers on her desk, avoiding my eyes. Patricia, I said, leaning forward. Is there anything I can do to appeal this decision? Any process for reviewing? Salary adjustments? You can submit a written request for review to the executive committee, she said. But Alex, I have to be honest with you, these restructuring decisions have been thoroughly vetted. They're unlikely to be reversed. I stared at her across the desk, this woman who'd processed my hiring paperwork 4 years ago, who'd congratulated me on performance reviews, who'd always seemed genuinely friendly, and now was delivering the most devastating professional blow of my life with the emotional investment of someone reading a grocery list. One more question, Patricia, I said, standing up. How many other people received compensation adjustment notices this morning? She hesitated. Alex, I can't discuss other employees' personnel matters. That's not what I'm asking. I'm asking how many people were affected by this company-wide restructuring that you mentioned. Another pause, longer this time. The restructuring affected several positions. Alex. Several, how many is several? Patricia, 5 people, 10 people, 20. Alex, I really can't. Am I the only one? The silence stretched between us. Her expression told me everything I needed to know. Thank you for your time, Patricia, I said, heading for the door. Alex, she called after me. I know this is difficult, but the company values your contributions and we hope you'll continue to be part of our team. I turned back to look at her. Patricia, do you know what the commission structure is for the Hartford contract? She looked confused. Commission structure. The Hartford deal is worth $1 billion to this company over the next 5 years. My commission on that contract based on the compensation plan in my employment agreement should be around $400. 00. Her face went pale. So let me understand this, I continued. The company is saving $105,000 per year by cutting my salary while collecting $400,000 in commission that should be mine for work. I already completed. That's quite a cost-saving measure, isn't it, Patricia? I left her office and walked slowly back to the elevator. My legs felt unsteady, and there was a ringing in my ears that made everything sound distant and muffled. On the elevator ride down to my floor, I tried to process what had just happened. Patricia's evasiveness, her inability to provide any concrete justification for the salary, cut her admission that the restructuring had affected several positions, which clearly meant it had affected one position, mine, the YI. Elevator doors opened, and I walked back to my desk, moving like I was underwater. Everything looked the same as it had yesterday. My computer, my files, my coffee mug from yesterday. Still sitting where I'd left it, but everything felt different. I sat down and opened my laptop, then opened the employee handbook and found the section on compensation and commission structures. I'd never paid much attention to it before because my salary had always been stable and the commission payments had always been processed automatically, but now I read every word according to the handbook. Sales commissions were calculated as a percentage of contract value paid out over the life of the contract. The Hartford deal should generate $400, 00 in commissions for me over 5 years, $80,000 per year on top of my base salary. Except now my base salary was $45,000, which meant the company was paying me $45,000 while collecting $2. $1 billion in revenue from work I had done. I stared at the numbers on my screen, feeling something cold and hard forming in my chest. This wasn't about operational efficiency or market conditions or any of the corporate buzzwords Patricia had thrown around. This was theft. They were stealing my commission by restructuring my salary, making it look like a company-wide cost-cutting measure, when really it was a targeted attack on the one person who had just become too valuable, too successful, too visible. I thought about Mark's silence after the Hartford announcement about his meeting with Sam about the email that had congratulated the entire organization while carefully avoiding any mention of my name. This had been planned while I was celebrating landing the biggest contract in company history. Mark and Sam and whoever else was involved had been planning how to make sure I never benefited from it. I sat at my desk for the rest of the morning staring at my computer screen, not really seeing anything, just trying to process the magnitude of what had been done to me, trying to understand how 4 years of loyalty and hard work had led to this moment. Around noon, Jordan stopped by my desk. "Alex," Jordan said, "you look terrible. What's wrong?" I looked up at Jordan, this person who'd been genuinely happy about my success with Hartford, who'd been outraged by Mark's failure to acknowledge my contribution, and I realized I couldn't tell the truth. I couldn't say that the company had just cut my salary by 70%, because word would spread and then everyone would know that Alex Martinez, the person who'd just landed the biggest deal in company history, was now making less than some of the entry-level employees. The humiliation would be unbearable. "Just tired," I said, long week. Jordan studied my face, clearly not buying it, but not pushing either. "Okay, well, if you need to talk about anything, you know where to find me." After Jordan left, I sat alone with the weight of what had happened, the isolation of it, the deliberate cruelty of it. They hadn't just cut my salary. They'd made sure I couldn't talk about it, couldn't seek support from colleagues, couldn't even explain why I suddenly looked like I'd been hit by a truck. It was perfect in its viciousness. I was alone, with my anger and my humiliation and the growing certainty that this was just the beginning, because people who were capable of something like this, people who could plan and execute such a calculated betrayal, weren't going to stop here. They were going to keep pushing, keep taking, keep making sure that Alex Martinez never forgot who really held the power in this company. But what they didn't know, what they couldn't have anticipated, was that they'd just made the biggest mistake of their professional lives, because Alex Martinez, the person who'd spent 4 years being reliable and compliant and invisible when necessary, was about to become very visible indeed. They wanted to play games. Fine, let's play. I couldn't focus on anything. The rest of that day, every time I tried to work on a project or respond to an email, my mind would drift back to the numbers, $45,000 down from $150,000 effective immediately. By 5 p.m., I'd accomplished nothing except staring at my computer screen and trying to make sense of what had happened that night. I went home and did something I'd never done before. I started digging through every piece of company communication I could access. I pulled up old emails going back months, looking for any mention of restructuring or cost-cutting measures, any hint that this had been planned. I searched through company newsletters, internal memos, anything that might give me insight into when this decision had been made and why what I found made my stomach turn. There was nothing. No mention of company-wide restructuring, no discussion of operational efficiency, no indication anywhere in any official communication that salary adjustments were being considered for anyone, which meant either this was the most poorly communicated corporate initiative in history, or Patricia had lied to me when she said it was part of a company-wide restructuring. I suspected the latter. Around midnight, I found something that made me sit up straight, an email thread from 3 weeks ago between Mark and the senior management team. The subject line was Q4 Strategic Planning, and I was CC'd on it because the Hartford contract had been part of the Q4 projections. Most of the email was routine budget discussions and revenue forecasts, but there was one exchange buried in the middle that caught my attention. Mark had written, "We need to discuss compensation alignment for high performing individual contributors. And Sam had responded, agreed. We should address this before year-end, compensation. Alignment high-performing individual contributors before year-end. I read the exchange 5 times, trying to decode the corporate speak. What did compensation alignment mean, and why did it need to be addressed before year-end? I kept digging in my sent folder. I found the email I'd sent to Mark 3 weeks ago, updating him on the status of the Hartford negotiations. It was detailed. Professional, outlining the key issues that needed to be resolved, and my timeline for closing the deal. Mark had responded with a single line, "Keep me posted on progress." But when I looked at the email properties, I noticed something strange. This email had been forwarded. Not just replied to. It had been forwarded to someone, but the forwarding information had been stripped from what I could see. I spent another hour trying to figure out how to trace email forwards in our system, but eventually gave up. It was beyond my technical skills, but the pattern was becoming clear. 3 weeks ago, Mark and Sam had discussed compensation alignment for high-performing individual contributors. 3 weeks ago, Mark had been getting detailed updates on my progress with Hartford, and 3 weeks ago, someone had been planning something that needed to be addressed before year-end. I finally went to bed around 2 a.m., but I couldn't sleep. My mind was racing, trying to connect the dots between what I'd found and what had happened to me the next morning. I arrived at the office early again, but this time I wasn't panicked. I was focused. I had questions, and I was going to find answers. I started with the obvious source. Jordan was at their desk by 8:30 a.m., looking through project files. When I approached Jordan, I said, "Can I ask you something off the record?" Jordan looked up and studied my face. "Sure, what's going on, Alex? You've looked like hell for 2 days. Have you heard anything? About company restructuring, salary adjustments, anything like that?" Jordan's expression became more serious. "What kind of salary adjustments?" I hesitated, not wanting to reveal too much. "Just wondering if there's anything going on that I should know about." "Alex," Jordan said, standing up. "Come with me." Jordan led me to a small conference room and closed the door. "What's really going on?" Jordan said. I looked at this person who'd been supportive of me, who'd been outraged by Mark's failure, to acknowledge my Hartford success, and made a decision. They cut my salary. I said, 70% cut effective immediately. Jordan stared at me. "What?" "Yesterday morning, I got an email from HR telling me my salary was being reduced from $150 or $0 to $45,000 as part of a company-wide restructuring initiative." "Company-wide," Jordan said. "Alex, I haven't heard anything about company-wide restructuring, and I'm on the senior management distribution list for operational communications." "That's what I was afraid of." Jordan sat down heavily. "Jesus Christ, Alex, this is about Hartford, isn't it?" "I think so, but I can't prove it." "Can't prove it." Jordan's voice was rising. "You land the biggest contract in company history, and 2 days later, they slash your salary by 70%. What more proof do you need?" "Legal proof, Jordan, the kind that would hold up if I decided to challenge this." Jordan was quiet for a moment, then looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before, determined, almost angry. "Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Alex, I need to tell you something, but you have to promise me this stays between us." I nodded. 6 months ago, Tom Garcia was the lead on the Meridian expansion project. Do you remember? I remembered Tom had been a senior project manager, well-liked, good at his job. He'd left the company abruptly, without much explanation. Tom landed the Meridian deal. Jordan continued. It was worth about $500 million, not as big as Hartford, but still significant, and about a week after the contract was signed, Tom started having problems. What kind of problems? First, his access to certain systems got restricted, then his project team got reassigned to other managers. Then he started getting excluded from meetings about his own project. I felt something cold forming in my stomach. What happened to him? He quit, Jordan said. But before he left, he told me something. He said Mark had offered him a choice. Take a demotion and a 60% pay cut or resign with a positive. Reference: 60% pay cut. Tom said Mark called it right-sizing his compensation to reflect his actual contribution to the project. I stared at Jordan. His actual contribution. Tom landed that deal single-handedly, just like I landed Hartford. Exactly. And when Tom pushed back when he demanded to know why his contribution was suddenly being questioned, Mark started making his life hell subtle stuff. Nothing you could file a complaint about, but enough to make it clear that Tom's future at the company was going to be very unpleasant. So he quit. And Mark got to keep the $500 million contract while paying out a fraction of what Tom should have earned in commissions. I felt like I was going to be sick. Jordan, is this a pattern? I think it might be Alex. I've been here for 10 years, and I've seen this happen before. Talented people land big deals. Then suddenly there are questions about their performance, about whether they're team players, about whether their compensation reflects their actual value to the company. How many people? That I know of: Tom, Sarah Walsh, who landed the Dynex partnership 2 years ago, Marcus Chen, who brought in the global tech account, and now you. What happened to Sarah and Marcus? Sarah took the demotion, stayed with the company for another year as a junior manager, then left for a competitor. Marcus fought it, took it to HR, filed a formal complaint. What happened with Marcus's complaint? Jordan's expression darkened. It was investigated thoroughly, and the investigation concluded that his compensation adjustment was justified based on performance metrics and market standards. Performance metrics. Apparently, Marcus's individual contribution to the global tech deal was less significant. Then he claimed the investigation found that the deal was really a team effort and that Marcus had been overcompensated relative to his actual impact. I stared at Jordan. But that's not true, is it? Marcus landed that deal himself. Alex just... Like you landed Hartford, just like Tom landed Meridian. But the investigation had documentation, emails, performance reviews, all kinds of evidence that supported the company's version of events. Fake evidence. I don't know how they do it, Alex. But somehow, when these investigations happen, the documentation always supports whatever decision Mark wants to make. I sat in silence, processing what Jordan had told me. This wasn't about me. This wasn't even about the Hartford contract. This was a system, a pattern, a way of doing business that allowed the company to benefit from individual success while avoiding the costs of individual compensation. Jordan, I said finally, why are you telling me this? Because you're good at your job. Alex, because you deserve better than this, and because I'm tired of watching good people get destroyed by this place. What do you think I should do? Jordan was quiet for a long moment. Honestly, Alex, I think you should start looking for another job. I think you should take whatever documentation you can get your hands on and find a lawyer. And I think you should be very, very careful about who you trust. Including you. Jordan met my eyes. Especially me. Alex, I've been here for 10 years. I've watched this happen before, and I've never done anything about it until now. That makes me complicit. Why now? Because I like you, because you're the first person who's ever asked the right questions, and because I'm tired of being complicit. We sat in silence for a few minutes, both of us thinking about what this meant. Jordan, I said, if I were to hypothetically start documenting things, if I were to hypothetically start building a case, what would I need? Evidence that this isn't. Performance-based evidence that the restructuring excuse is fake evidence that there's a pattern of this happening to people who land big deals. How would I get that kind of evidence? Jordan looked at me carefully. Hypothetically, someone with access to HR files and personnel records might be able to find patterns in compensation adjustments. Someone with access to email servers might be able to trace communications that show planning and coordination. Someone with 10 years of institutional Knowledge might be able to identify other victims who might be willing to talk. And hypothetically, would that someone be willing to help? That someone might be Alex, but that someone would also need to be very careful about how they went about it. Because if Mark and Sam and whoever else is involved in this realized what was happening, the consequences would be severe for everyone involved. I nodded, understanding the risks we were both taking just by having this conversation. There's something else, Jordan said. Nina Patel in analytics, she's been asking questions about compensation data patterns in the company. I think she's noticed some irregularities. What kind of irregularities? Ask her, Alex, but be careful about how you do it. Nina's smart, but she's also new, and if she gets spooked, she might go to the wrong people with what she knows. I left the conference room with more questions than answers, but also with something I hadn't had before. A sense that I wasn't alone in this, that there were other people who'd noticed what was happening and who might be willing to help me understand it. But I also left with a clear understanding of the risks Mark and his team weren't just stealing money, they were systematically destroying the careers of anyone who threatened their control. Anyone who became too successful, too visible, too valuable. And now I was in their crosshairs. The question was whether I was going to let them destroy me the way they'd destroyed Tom and Sarah and Marcus, or whether I was going to fight back sitting at my desk later that afternoon, staring at another email from Patricia, asking me to confirm receipt of my compensation adjustment notice. I made my decision. I was going to fight back, but I was going to be smart about it. I was going to document everything, build an airtight case, and when I was ready, I was going to expose the whole corrupt system for what it was. They thought they could steal from me, manipulate me, intimidate me into accepting their version of reality. They were wrong. But first I needed to understand exactly what I was up against, and that meant finding Nina Patel and learning what she'd discovered about compensation patterns in the company. It meant tracing every email, every decision, every conversation that had led to this moment. It meant building a case so strong that even Mark's ability to manipulate documentation and create false evidence wouldn't be enough to protect him. I had work to do. Finding Nina Patel wasn't hard. She worked 3 floors up in analytics in a cubicle, surrounded by monitors displaying charts and data visualizations that looked like abstract art. I waited until lunch when most of her department had cleared out, then walked over and knocked on her cubicle wall. Nina, I said, do you have a minute? To talk. She looked up from her computer, her dark eyes curious behind wire-rimmed glasses. Alex Wright, you're the one who landed the Hartford contract. Congratulations. Thanks, I said, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. Actually, that's kind of what I wanted to talk to you about. Jordan mentioned you've been looking at compensation data. Nina's expression shifted, becoming more guarded. What kind of compensation data? Patterns, I said. Irregularities. Anything that might seem unusual. She studied my face for a long moment, then minimized the windows on her computer. Why are you asking Alex? I made a decision to trust her. Because something happened to me after the Hartford deal. Something that doesn't make sense, and Jordan thinks you might have noticed similar things in the data. Nina was quiet. Then she looked around the nearly empty floor and gestured for me to sit in the chair next to her desk. Alex, she said, lowering her voice, I've been running correlation, analyses on compensation changes and contract acquisitions for the past 6 months. It started as a personal project, just trying to understand how performance bonuses and salary adjustments work in this company. What did you find? Anomalies, she said. Significant ones. People who land major contracts experiencing compensation reductions within weeks of deal closure. It happens often enough that it can't be coincidental. My heart started racing. How often? In the last 3 years, I've identified 7 cases where employees who secured contracts over $100 million experienced salary reductions of 50% or more within 30 days of contract signature. 7 cases, including me that made 8. Nina, do you have names? She hesitated. I shouldn't be sharing this data, Alex. It's confidential employee information. Nina, I said, they cut my salary by 70%, 2 days after I closed Hartford. They told me it was company restructuring, but you and I both know that's not true. Her eyes widened. 70%? 150? 0 down to $45,000 effective immediately. Nina stared at me, then turned back to her computer and started typing rapidly, pulling up spreadsheets and charts. Here, she said, pointing to a graph. This shows compensation changes correlated with contract values. The pattern is clear. The bigger the deal, the more severe the salary reduction. I looked at the chart feeling sick. The correlation was undeniable. Nina, this is systematic. It gets worse, she said, pulling up another document. I've been trying to trace the decision-making process for these adjustments, and there's something strange about the documentation. What do you mean? The HR files for these cases all contain performance reviews and evaluations that justify the salary reductions. But Alex, I've been here for 2 years, and I've never seen these types of detailed performance evaluations for anyone else. You think they're fabricated. I think they're created after the fact to justify decisions that have already been made. Nina pulled up another screen showing email metadata. I've been analyzing the timestamps on these documents. Alex, the performance reviews that justify the salary cuts are all created within 48 hours of the contract signatures. 48 hours. Comprehensive performance evaluations that supposedly reflect months of observation and assessment, all written in a 2-day window after each deal closes. I stared at the data, feeling a mixture of rage and vindication. Nina, this is evidence of fraud. It's evidence of something, she said. But Alex, you need to understand what you're up against. She pulled up one more document, an organizational chart with highlighted connections. Mark, Sam, and 3 other senior executives are all connected to these decisions. They're not just covering up individual cases. They're running a coordinated operation. An operation to do what? To systematically steal commission payments from high-performing employees. Nina said, Alex, do you know what your commission should be on the Hartford contract? About $400. Zood over 5 years. And at your new salary, what will you actually receive? I did the math quickly. $45,000 base salary. No commission structure at that level, essentially nothing. So the company saves $400,000 in commission payments plus $105. 0 per year in salary reduction. That's over $900,000 they're stealing from you alone. The numbers were staggering, but what made it worse was the realization that this wasn't just about money. Nina, they're destroying people's careers, their lives. I know, she said. Alex, I've been wondering what to do with this information for months. I know it's wrong, but I also know what happens to people who challenge Mark. What happens? They disappear. She said simply, not literally, but professionally. They get transferred to dead-end projects, their access gets restricted, they get pushed out. Like Tom Garcia. Nina nodded. Tom was one of the cases in my data. Alex, they did to him exactly what they're doing to you. I sat back in the chair trying to process everything Nina had shown me, the scope of the fraud, the systematic nature of it, the coordination required to pull it off. Nina, I said, would you be willing to help me document this properly? What do you mean? I mean building a case that would hold up in court or with regulators, something that couldn't be dismissed or covered up. Nina was quiet for a long time, staring at her computer screen. Alex, she said finally, if we do this, if we really try to expose what's happening, we need to be prepared for them to come after us with everything they have. I know. And we need to be smarter than they are. We need to document everything securely. Keep copies they can't access or destroy. And we need to be very careful about who else we involve. Are you willing to do that? Nina looked at me with an expression that was part fear, part determination. Alex, they're stealing from people, destroying careers, ruining lives. Someone has to stop them. Is that a yes? That's a yes. But Alex, we do this my way. We use encrypted communications. We keep physical copies of everything in secure locations, and we assume that everyone else in this company is potentially compromised. Everyone? Everyone? She said, even Jordan. Even people who seem like allies until we know for certain who we can trust, we assume we're on our own. I nodded. Understanding the paranoia was justified given what we were up against. What's our first step? What a documentation, Nina said. I need to copy all the data I've collected onto secure drives, and you need to start recording every conversation, every email, every interaction you have with Mark Sam or anyone else involved in this. Recording legally, she said. Check the laws in our state. But if we're going to bring this down, we need evidence that can't be disputed or explained away. I left Nina's cubicle with a sense of purpose. I hadn't felt since the morning I'd received the salary cut email we had evidence we had a plan, and we had each other. But as I walked back to my desk, I also felt the weight of what we were attempting. Mark and his team had been running this operation for years. They had resources, legal departments, and institutional power. We had spreadsheets and righteous anger. But sometimes that's enough. Sometimes that's all it takes to bring down people who think they're untouchable. The next 2 weeks were the most paranoid of my life. I started carrying a small digital recorder everywhere, setting it to voice activation. Before every meeting with Mark or Sam, I downloaded an app that automatically backed up my emails to an encrypted cloud service. I took photos of every document that crossed my desk. Nina and I met in coffee shops and restaurants never the same. Placed twice using burner phones and encrypted messaging apps like we were running some kind of corporate espionage operation. Which in a way, what we discovered during those 2 weeks was worse than either of us had imagined Nina had managed. To access archived HR data going back 5 years, the pattern wasn't just recent. It had been happening systematically for half a decade. At least, 15 employees had been subjected to the same treatment I'd received, major deal closers who'd been financially kneecapped and professionally destroyed, but the most damning evidence came from an unexpected source. Nina had been monitoring email traffic patterns using her analytics access to track communication flows between executives. What she found was a series of encrypted email exchanges between Mark Sam and 2 other senior executives that happened like clockwork within 24 hours of every major contract signature. They're coordinating, Nina told me over coffee at a diner 20 minutes from the office. Every time someone lands a big deal, there's immediate communication between the 4 of them. Can you decrypt the emails? No, but I can trace the timing and the pattern is unmistakable. She showed me a timeline on her laptop, major contract signatures marked in green encrypted email exchanges, marked in red salary cuts marked in black. The correlation was perfect. Nina, this proves coordination. This proves it's intentional. It proves there's communication. Alex, but it doesn't prove what they're discussing. What more do we need? We need one of them to admit what they're doing, or we need documentation that explicitly shows the scheme. That's when I had an idea. Nina, what if we could get them to document it themselves? What do you mean? What if I could get Mark to put their strategy in writing? What if I could make him think he needs to explain or justify what they're doing? Nina looked at me like I'd suggested walking into a lion's cage. Alex, that's incredibly dangerous. Maybe, but think about it. Mark's weakness is his ego. He likes to be seen as strategic, brilliant. What if I approached him not as a victim, but as someone who wants to understand the business rationale? You want to pretend you're okay with what they did. I want to make him think I'm impressed by it, make him want to explain how clever he's been. Nina was quiet for a long time, stirring her coffee and thinking, Alex, if you're wrong, if he suspects what you're really doing, then we're no worse off than we are now. Nina, they've already destroyed my career. They've already stolen from me. What more can they do? They can make sure you never work in this industry again. They can destroy your reputation. Make you unemployable. They're already doing that. Nina, the question is whether we're going to let them get away with it. That afternoon, I did something that went against every instinct I had. I requested a meeting with Mark. His assistant, Ben, looked surprised when I walked up to his desk. "Alex, you want to schedule time with Mark?" "Yes," I said. "I'd like to discuss my career development and compensation structure." Ben checked Mark's calendar. "He has 20 minutes tomorrow at 4 p.m. Will that work?" Perfect. That night, I practiced the conversation over and over in my mirror, trying to perfect the tone I needed. Submissive enough that Mark wouldn't see me as a threat, but engaged enough that he'd want to explain his brilliance I needed. Him to think I was impressed by what he'd done, that I understood it was business, not personal, that I wanted to learn from his strategic thinking. It was the performance of my life the next day at exactly 4 p.m. I knocked on Mark's office door. "Alex," he said, looking up from his computer. "Come in, have a seat." His office was exactly what you'd expect from a CEO who thought he was smarter than everyone else. Floor-to-ceiling windows, expensive furniture, a wall covered with awards and photos of him with various business leaders and politicians. "Mark?" I said, settling into the chair across from his desk. "I wanted to thank you for taking the time to meet with me." "Of course, Alex, what's on your mind?" I took a breath and launched into my performance. "Mark, I'll be honest. The compensation adjustment caught me off guard initially, but after thinking about it, I realized there's probably a strategic rationale that I'm not seeing." His expression shifted slightly, becoming more interested. "Strategic rationale?" "Well, yes." I said, "A company doesn't make decisions like that randomly. There must be business logic behind it, and I was hoping you could help me understand it." Mark leaned back in his chair, and for the first time since the Hartford announcement, he actually looked at me like I was worth his attention. "Alex," he said, "most people in your situation would be angry, would be making demands or threats. I was angry. Initially," I said, "but then I realized that's because I was thinking about it from a personal perspective rather than a business perspective." "Exactly," Mark said, and I could see his ego engaging. "Alex, the truth is most employees never understand. The bigger picture, they think about their individual contributions, their individual compensation, but they don't see how those pieces fit into the larger strategic framework." I nodded encouragingly. "That's exactly what I realized, Mark. I landed the Hartford contract, but that doesn't exist in isolation. There are overhead costs, management costs, strategic considerations that I wasn't factoring in." "Precisely," Mark said, warming to the topic. "Alex, when someone lands a major contract, the immediate assumption is that they deserve a proportional increase in compensation, but that's not how sophisticated businesses operate." I leaned forward, trying to look fascinated. "How do sophisticated businesses operate?" Mark smiled, and I knew I had him. "Alex, successful companies understand that individual success is really organizational success. The systems, the infrastructure, the brand recognition, the management oversight, those are what enable individual contributors to succeed." So, the compensation adjustment was about aligning individual rewards with organizational contribution. "Exactly," Mark said. "Alex, the Hartford contract happened because of years of organizational investment in systems, processes, client relationships. When we properly account for those factors, the individual contribution, while valuable, is much smaller than it initially appears." I nodded sagely while the recorder in my pocket captured every word. "That makes sense, Mark. But how do you determine the appropriate adjustment? How do you calculate organizational versus individual contribution?" "That's the art of leadership, Alex," Mark said. It requires understanding not just the numbers, but the strategic implications, market positioning, competitive advantage. He was enjoying himself now, explaining his brilliance to someone who finally appreciated it. "Mark, this is exactly the kind of strategic thinking I want to learn," I said. "The Hartford situation is obviously just one example, but I imagine you've had to make similar adjustments before." "Oh, absolutely. Alex, this isn't the first time we've had to right-size compensation to reflect actual contribution versus perceived contribution." "Right-size compensation," I repeated. "That's a great way to put it." Mark spent the next 10 minutes explaining his philosophy of compensation management, using corporate speak to describe what was essentially systematic theft. He talked about market dynamics and organizational efficiency and strategic resource allocation. What he was really describing was a system for stealing commission payments from successful employees, and he was documenting it all in his own words. When the meeting ended, I thanked him profusely for his insights and promised to apply his strategic thinking to my own career development. Walking back to my desk, I felt like I was floating. Mark had just confessed to systematic compensation fraud while believing he was mentoring an ambitious employee that night. I met Nina at the diner and played her the recording. She listened in silence, her expression growing more amazed and horrified with each word. "Alex," she said when it finished, "he just admitted to everything." "Not just admitted," I said. He explained. The methodology, he described it as intentional strategic policy. "This is enough, Alex. This recording plus my data analysis. This is enough to bring them down." But as we sat there celebrating our breakthrough, I realized something: we had the evidence, but we still needed to decide what to do with it, and that decision would determine not just Mark's fate, but our own. The plan Nina and I developed was elegant in its simplicity. Instead of going to the media or filing lawsuits or making dramatic accusations, we were going to let Mark destroy himself using Nina's access to the company's client database. I identified the 3 biggest prospects in our sales pipeline. Hartford had been huge, but there were other deals in progress, other companies that were considering multi-million-dollar contracts with us. What these prospects didn't know was that they were potentially entering into agreements with a company that systematically defrauded its own employees. So I told them not directly, not in a way that could be traced back to me, but through a series of anonymous tips sent to the right people at the right companies. The first email went to the CFO of Meridian Global, a company considering an $800 million infrastructure deal. Thought, "You should be aware of some concerning practices at TechCorp regarding how they treat employees who deliver major contracts. Might want to verify that the people who negotiated your deal are still with the company and being fairly compensated." The second went to the legal department at Axis Industries, who were in final negotiations for a $600 million partnership. Recommend conducting due diligence on TechCorp's internal compensation practices, particularly related to sales staff turnover. Following major contract signatures, the third went to Hartford Analytics themselves. Wanted to make you aware that the executive who secured your recent contract has had their compensation reduced by 70% following the deal closure, might indicate some concerning management practices. Nina had been monitoring email traffic, and within 48 hours of sending those messages, we saw a flurry of activity. Encrypted communications between Mark and his inner circle, spiked phone calls to the legal department increased, and most tellingly, several senior executives started having unscheduled meetings. But the real impact came 3 days later. I was at my desk when Ben from Mark's office came over looking pale and shaken. "Alex," he said, "Mark wants to see you immediately." I followed him to Mark's office, where I found not just Mark but Sam and 2 other executives I didn't recognize, all looking like they'd been awake for days. "Alex," Mark said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Sit down." I sat, trying to look confused and innocent. "Alex, we've had some concerning communications from several of our major clients," Mark continued. "They're asking questions about employee compensation and turnover." Okay, I said. What kind of questions? Questions about you specifically. Alex, questions about whether you're still with the company, whether you've been fairly compensated for your work on the Hartford contract. I let my expression show surprise. That's strange. Why would they be asking about that? Sam leaned forward. Alex, these communications came shortly. After your salary adjustment, someone with knowledge of internal company matters has been contacting our clients. That's terrible, I said. Who would do something like that? Mark studied my face. Alex, I'm going to ask you directly, have you had any communication with Hartford Analytics or any other clients about your compensation or treatment by this company? No, Mark, absolutely not, I said. And technically it was true. I hadn't communicated with them directly. Because Alex, if someone in this company is sabotaging our client relationships, that person would face severe consequences, legal consequences. Of course, Mark, I understand completely. But even as I sat there playing the innocent employee, I could see the cracks forming. Mark's confidence was shaken. His carefully controlled demeanor was slipping, and the other executives looked like they were already calculating exit strategies. The next day, the dam burst. Hartford Analytics sent a formal letter requesting clarification about personnel changes affecting the management team responsible for our recent agreement. Meridian Global postponed their contract signing pending additional due diligence regarding vendor stability and management practices. Axis Industries pulled out entirely with a terse email stating, "We have concerns about corporate culture and employee treatment that make this partnership inadvisable." Nina found me at lunch with updates from her monitoring. Alex, she said, sitting down across from me, the panic is spreading. The encrypted communications between the executives have tripled. They're having emergency meetings with legal counsel and the board. What are they discussing? Damage control, Alex. They're trying to figure out how to contain this, but it's too late. The clients are talking to each other, sharing information. Sharing what information? Apparently, Hartford reached out to other TechCorp clients to ask if they'd experienced similar issues. The word is spreading. Throughout the industry, I felt a mixture of satisfaction and terror. The plan was working better than we'd hoped, but that also meant the consequences were going to be severe. Nina, what's our exposure? Minimal, she said. The anonymous tips can't be traced back to us, and all the information that's coming out is either public record or things the clients are discovering through their own investigations. But Mark suspects. Mark suspects everyone. Alex, he's in full paranoia mode, but he can't prove anything and he can't stop the bleeding. That afternoon, I got called into another meeting, this time with Mark, Sam, and someone from the legal department. Alex. The lawyer said, "We're conducting an internal investigation into the leak of confidential information to external parties." I understand, I said. As part of this investigation, we'll be reviewing all employee communications, including emails, phone records, and computer access logs. Of course. Alex. Mark said, "If you have any information about who might be responsible for contacting our clients, it's in your best interest to share that information now." I looked him directly in the eyes. Mark, I wish I could help, but I don't have any information about that. You understand, Alex, that interfering with client relationships could be considered corporate sabotage. Yes, Mark, I understand. But what Mark didn't understand was that the damage was already done. The anonymous tips had simply accelerated a process. That was inevitable once clients started asking questions about employee turnover and compensation practices. The whole house of cards was going to fall. Because the truth was that TechCorp's business model was fundamentally unsustainable. You can't systematically defraud your best performers without eventually facing consequences. And those consequences were now manifesting as a crisis of confidence. Among the company's biggest clients over the next week, the situation deteriorated rapidly. 3 more major prospects pulled out of negotiations. Hartford Analytics requested a meeting to discuss concerns about the stability of our partnership. Industry publications started asking questions about TechCorp's management practices, and through it all, Mark and his team scrambled desperately to control a narrative that had already escaped their grasp. Nina and I watched it unfold with a mixture of amazement and satisfaction. We had done this with a few anonymous emails and some carefully placed questions. We had triggered the collapse of a system that had been operating with impunity for years. But as the company's crisis deepened, I realized that our victory was going to come with costs, because when TechCorp finally imploded, it wasn't just going to take down Mark and his conspirators, it was going to take down a lot of innocent people too. The call came on a Friday morning at 7:23 a.m. I was still in bed when my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Alex Martinez. I said, "Miss Martinez, this is David Chen from Corvus Dynamics. I hope I'm not calling too early." Corvus Dynamics. I knew the name. They were one of the biggest consulting firms in the country. Major league players? Not at all. I said, sitting up. "What can I do for you?" "Ms. Martinez, we've been following the situation at TechCorp with great interest, particularly your work on the Hartford Analytics contract. We'd like to discuss a potential opportunity with you." My heart started racing. What kind of opportunity? A senior director position heading up our new enterprise partnerships division. It would involve managing relationships with Fortune 500 clients and leading a team of 12 people. I was quiet for a moment, trying to process what I was hearing. "Mr. Chen, I'm flattered, but I'm currently employed at TechCorp." "Yes, we're aware of that, Ms. Martinez. We're also aware of some of the challenges you've been facing there." Challenges. "Ms. Martinez, our industry is smaller than people think. Word gets around about talented people who aren't being treated appropriately." "I see." The position would come with a base salary of $210,000 plus performance bonuses and equity participation. "Ms. Martinez, this is a leadership role where your contributions would be recognized and rewarded appropriately." $210,000. That was 40% more than my original salary at TechCorp and nearly 5 times what they were paying me. "Now, Mr. Chen, this is very unexpected. Ms. Martinez, talent like yours doesn't go unnoticed. The Hartford deal was exceptional work, and we believe you have the skills and experience to succeed at the highest levels. When would you need an answer?" "There's no rush, Ms. Martinez, but we'd like to schedule a formal interview. If you're interested, we can arrange that for early next week." After I hung up, I sat in bed staring at the ceiling, trying to understand what had just happened. Corvus Dynamics wasn't just offering me a job. They were offering me a career, the kind of position I'd been working toward for years. But more than that, they were offering me recognition, validation, proof that my work had value. Even if TechCorp refused to acknowledge it, I called Nina. "Nina," I said when she answered, "we need to talk." We met at our usual diner, and I told her about the call from Corvus. "Alex." She said, "This is incredible." "I know, but Nina, what does this mean for our investigation, for exposing what Mark has been doing?" "Alex," Nina said carefully, "maybe it means you don't need to expose anything. Maybe it means you can just walk away." "Walk away?" "Alex, you've already won. TechCorp is falling apart. Their clients are abandoning them. Mark's credibility is destroyed. You've accomplished what we set out to do." "But what about justice, Nina? What about the other people who were hurt? What about making sure this never happens again?" Nina was quiet for a long time, stirring her coffee. "Alex," she said finally, "sometimes the best revenge is success. Sometimes walking away and thriving is more powerful than staying and fighting. You think I should take the Corvus job? I think you should do whatever makes you happiest, Alex. But I also think you should consider that staying at TechCorp, even to fight, might not be worth the cost." That weekend, I thought about Nina's words, about the Corvus offer, about everything that had happened over the past month. Monday morning, I walked into Mark's office without an appointment. Ben tried to stop me, but I pushed past him and knocked on Mark's door. "Alex," Mark said, looking up from his computer, What are you doing here? Mark, I wanted to let you know that I'll be resigning from TechCorp effective immediately. His expression shifted from surprise to something that looked almost like relief. Alex, I'm sorry to hear that, but I understand given recent circumstances. Recent circumstances. The company has been under a lot of pressure. Alex and I know that's created a difficult environment for everyone. I looked at this man who had stolen from me, who had tried to destroy my career, who had systematically defrauded dozens of employees over the years, and I realized I didn't need him to admit what he'd done. I didn't need an apology, or an explanation, or any kind of acknowledgement. I just needed to leave Mark. I said, I hope you figure out how to fix the problems here. Alex, he said as I turned to go, for what it's worth, you did good work on the Hartford contract. I stopped and looked back at him. Thank you, Mark. And then I walked out. Not because I forgave him. Not because what he'd done was acceptable, but because I had something he could never take away from me. I had a future. I had offers, opportunities, recognition. From people who understood my value, I had won as I cleaned out my desk that afternoon. Jordan stopped by. Alex, I heard you're leaving. Corvus Dynamics offered me a senior director position. Jordan smiled. Alex, that's fantastic. Jordan, what's going to happen here? Honestly, Alex, I think TechCorp is finished. The client departures, the investigation into management practices, the bad publicity. I think Mark's going to be lucky if he can sell the company for parts. And you. I've got some interviews lined up. Alex, turns out when a company collapses, recruiters start circling. Good. As I packed up my personal items, Nina appeared at my cubicle. Alex, how did it go? I resigned. How do you feel? I thought about that question as I looked around the office that had been my professional home for 4 years, the place where I'd worked so hard for recognition that never came free. I said, free. Nina, for the first time in years, I feel free. That evening, I called David Chen at Corvus Dynamics and accepted their offer. Not because I was running away from TechCorp, but because I was running toward something better. Toward a place where my contributions would matter, where success would be rewarded, where I could build the career I'd always wanted. Mark had tried to break me, tried to steal my future, tried to make me believe I was worthless. Instead, he had freed me. He had forced me to recognize my own value, to understand that I didn't need TechCorp or his approval or his system. I needed to trust myself. And now I was going to prove that the biggest mistake Mark Donovan ever made was underestimating Alex Martinez. I packed my office in silence 20 minutes to box up 4 years of my life photos awards, the coffee mug with the chip on the handle that I'd never bothered to replace. Colleagues walked by offering congratulations on the new job, but keeping their distance like my departure might be contagious. Mark appeared in my doorway as I sealed the last box. Alex, he said. Mark? Good luck at Corvus. I looked at him one final time, this man who'd tried to break me, who'd taught me more about power and corruption than any business school ever could. Thank you, Mark, I said. Then I walked to the elevator carrying my box of memories and my hard-won freedom. The doors closed on TechCorp forever. Corvus Dynamics felt like stepping into a different universe. Glass offices, collaborative workspaces, people who looked energized instead of defeated. My first day, David. Chen introduced me to my team, 12 talented professionals who actually seemed excited to work together. Alex will be leading our enterprise partnerships division. David announced, she brings exceptional experience in client relations and strategic deal development. Exceptional experience, not the person who cleans up messes. Not someone who can handle difficult situations. Someone whose skills had value. My office had windows overlooking the city. My nameplate read, Alex Martinez Sr. Director. And when I sat down at my desk for the first time, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Pride 3 years later, Nina called with news. TechCorp had finally collapsed. Mark was facing federal charges for securities fraud, and several former employees were filing civil suits. Alex, she said, they want you to testify. I thought about justice, about closure, about the satisfaction of watching Mark face consequences. Nina, I said, I already testified. What do you mean? Every day I come to work at a company that values me every promotion, every successful project, every person I mentor who doesn't have to experience what we experienced, that's my testimony. So you won't testify. I don't need to. Nina, my success is the only testimony that matters. Because sometimes the most powerful revenge is simply refusing to be broken and thriving anyway. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.